Some doors are never meant to be opened on a night when the wind forgets mercy. But sometimes, the only thing standing between life and death is the courage to turn the handle anyway. The storm arrived long before sunset. Not the kind that painted the mountains white for children to admire. This one swallowed trails, erased landmarks, and silenced every sound beneath an endless roar of wind. Snow drifted across the Wyoming frontier like restless spirits searching for names long forgotten. Even the pines bowed beneath the weight of the blizzard, their branches groaning whenever another violent gust tore across the valley. Miles away from the nearest settlement, a weather-beaten cabin stood alone against the mountainside. Its owner had stopped expecting visitors years ago. Elias Walker placed another log into the stone fireplace and watched orange flames crawl across the dry wood. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, old leather, and coffee that had been left warming since afternoon. Outside, the windows rattled every few moments as icy wind clawed against them, as though something unseen wished to be invited inside. He paid it no attention. Out here, loneliness became another piece of furniture. You stopped noticing it after enough winters. The old wall clock ticked steadily. His horse shifted uneasily inside the nearby stable. Then, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. Elias slowly raised his head. Nobody traveled these mountains once darkness fell. Nobody sane. He remained perfectly still. Perhaps it had been the wind striking loose timber. Another knock. This one harder. Closer. His weathered hand instinctively reached for the Winchester resting beside the fireplace. Years of living alone had taught him one lesson above all others. The wilderness rarely announced danger twice. Without making a sound, Elias crossed the cabin floor. Each floorboard creaked beneath heavy boots polished by years of dust instead of vanity. He stopped beside the door. The knocking had ceased. Only the storm remained. He rested one hand against the wooden frame, listening. Nothing. For several long seconds, there was only the howl of snow racing through the darkness. Then, a voice, barely louder than a whisper. Please. It was a woman's voice. Weak, breaking, almost carried away before reaching him. Elias hesitated. The rifle stayed in one hand, while the other slowly lifted the iron latch. The door opened only a few inches before the wind forced itself inside with enough strength to extinguish the oil lamp nearest the entrance. Snow exploded across the wooden floor. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing except swirling white. Then a figure emerged from the storm. A woman collapsed forward before a single word could be spoken. Her body struck the cabin floor with a dull thud. The wind tried to drag her cloak back into the darkness. Elias slammed the door shut with his shoulder. Silence returned. Only the crackling fire remained. She couldn't have been older than 30. Long black hair, frozen with ice, spilled across the floorboards. Snow clung to every fold of her buckskin clothing. Her breathing came in shallow bursts, each one sounding weaker than the last. A thin line of dried blood disappeared beneath the edge of her sleeve, staining the pale blanket of snow that had followed her inside. He crouched carefully beside her. Her skin was cold enough to steal warmth from his hands. An Apache woman. Even beneath the frost covering her face, the beadwork stitched into her clothing and the small turquoise earrings told their own story. For years, Elias had heard countless stories about Apache riders crossing distant valleys. Most came wrapped in fear, others in lies. None had prepared him for this. He noticed something else. Her right hand refused to let go of a small leather satchel. The fingers were stiff with cold. Even unconscious, she held it so tightly her knuckles had turned almost white beneath bronze skin. Elias tried gently to loosen her grip. She didn't wake, but her fingers tightened even more, as if whatever rested inside mattered more than breathing. He frowned. Gold. Medicine? A family keepsake? There was no way to know. Not yet. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and another beneath her knees. She weighed far less than he expected. The cold had stolen nearly all her strength. He carried her toward the fireplace and laid her carefully on a thick wool blanket beside the flames. As he reached for dry towels and warm water, something slipped from beneath the edge of her sleeve. Not the satchel. A silver bracelet. Old. Scratched. Its worn engraving caught the firelight for only a second. That single glance was enough to stop Elias where he stood. His breathing slowed. Because he had seen that bracelet before. Not yesterday. Not last year, but somewhere buried beneath memories he had spent decades trying to forget. Outside, the blizzard continued to bury the mountain beneath another layer of white. Far beyond the cabin, hidden somewhere inside that endless storm, the faint sound of horse bells drifted across the frozen valley. Someone else was coming. Fire has a strange way of telling the truth. It cannot erase the cold outside, but it always reveals what people try hardest to hide. The cabin grew quiet again. Only the wind argued with the mountains. Elias knelt beside the woman, feeding another log into the fireplace until sparks climbed toward the stone chimney. Warm light slowly pushed the shadows away, revealing more of the stranger who had crossed half a mountain just to collapse at his doorstep. Her breathing remained uneven. Too slow. Too shallow. He dipped a clean cloth into warm water and carefully wiped the ice from her face. Frost melted against bronze skin, revealing bruises that the snow had hidden. One dark mark spread beneath her jaw. Another circled her wrist as though someone had gripped it with unnecessary force. Those weren't wounds left by winter. Someone had put them there. Elias said nothing. Questions could wait until morning. Life could not. He wrapped another wool blanket around her shoulders before setting a cast-iron kettle above the flames. The familiar scent of sage and coffee soon drifted through the room, replacing the bitter smell of frozen leather. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt empty. Yet somehow, it felt far less peaceful. His eyes wandered again to the leather satchel still trapped beneath her arm. Small, weathered, old enough that the stitching had been repaired several times. Whatever rested inside had survived many journeys. Perhaps too many. He reached toward it once more. Slowly, carefully, before his fingers could touch the leather. Her hand suddenly clamped around his wrist. Her eyes flew open, dark, sharp, filled with the kind of fear that belonged to hunted people. For one long heartbeat, neither of them moved. She pulled herself backward despite the pain, pressing the satchel tightly against her chest. No. The word came out hoarse, barely stronger than a whisper, but it carried absolute certainty. Elias slowly raised both hands away from the satchel. I wasn't stealing. She studied him without blinking. Outside, another gust slammed against the cabin walls. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she loosened her grip on his wrist, though not on the satchel. You should have left me outside, she murmured. His weathered face revealed little. Storm would have buried you before sunrise. She lowered her eyes toward the fire. Maybe that would have been easier. The words lingered inside the room long after she spoke them. Elias had heard men talk that way after losing wars, after burying wives, after watching ranches burn to ash. He had never expected to hear them from someone who looked barely 30. He poured a tin cup of warm broth and offered it across the blanket. She hesitated, then accepted it with both hands. Not because she trusted him, because her body had no strength left to refuse kindness. She drank slowly. Each swallow seemed to return a little color to her face. My name is Elias, he said quietly. She stared into the steam rising from the cup. Several seconds passed before she answered. Ayanna. Nothing more. No family name. No tribe. No explanation. Only Ayanna. The wind eased for the first time that night. In the brief silence, another sound reached them. Very faint. Almost impossible to hear. Horse bells. Far away. Ayanna froze. The tin cup trembled between her hands. Her eyes snapped toward the window. They found me. Elias listened. At first, he heard nothing except the dying wind. Then, there it was again. Metal striking metal somewhere beyond the white darkness. Not one rider. Several. Moving slowly. Searching. Ayanna set the cup down so quickly that broth spilled across the floorboards. You don't understand, she whispered, panic replacing exhaustion. If they see this cabin. Her voice broke. They'll kill you too. Elias walked toward the frost-covered window without another word. He brushed away a thin layer of ice with the back of his hand. The storm still hid most of the valley. But far below, small lights drifted through the snow. Lanterns. 3 of them. Perhaps 4. 2 organized to be travelers. 2 patient to be lost. He felt the familiar weight of the Winchester as he lifted it from beside the fireplace. Not because he wanted trouble. Because trouble had already found his door. Behind him, Ayanna quietly reached beneath her blanket and slipped one hand inside the leather satchel. Whatever she touched there mattered more to her than the rifle in Elias's hands. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the lanterns continued climbing the mountain. Some secrets are too heavy to be buried. They simply wait for someone brave enough to carry them through the storm. The lanterns disappeared behind another curtain of snow. For now, Elias stepped away from the window, though his eyes lingered on the darkness outside. The riders were still climbing. Slowly, patiently. Men who hunted in a blizzard were not chasing cattle. They were chasing someone. He rested the Winchester beside the door instead of pointing it toward the stranger. There would be time for weapons later. First came the truth. Ayanna sat motionless beside the fire, both hands wrapped around the leather satchel. The flames reflected in her eyes, but they carried no warmth. She watched the cabin door as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. "You should leave," she whispered. "I'm not walking into that storm." "I wasn't talking about the storm." Elias looked at her for several seconds. Then, without another word, he pulled a heavy oak table closer to the fireplace and set an old oil lamp upon it. If danger was coming, panic would only help it arrive sooner. He opened a small wooden cupboard and removed strips of dried venison, fresh bandages, and a bottle of homemade liniment. As he knelt to replace the dressing on her wounded arm, something slipped from beneath the edge of the satchel. Not enough to fall, just enough for him to see it. A corner of yellowed paper. Old, folded many times. Its edge bore the faded imprint of a blue wax seal. Government wax. Ayanna immediately pushed it back inside. Too late. Elias had already noticed. "Army papers?" he asked quietly. Her jaw tightened. "No. You answered too fast." Silence settled between them again. The fire cracked. Outside, wind scraped frozen branches across the cabin roof. Finally, Ayanna closed her eyes. "They're not army papers anymore." The answer only deepened the mystery. She slowly loosened the leather strap around the satchel. Not because she trusted Elias, because she seemed exhausted from carrying its weight. One by one, she placed 3 objects onto the table. The folded document, a tarnished silver bracelet, and a small hand-drawn map on worn buckskin. Nothing else. No gold. No jewels. No money. The map immediately caught Elias's attention. The ink had faded with age, but one location had been marked by a dark circle. Beside it stood a symbol carved rather than written. He recognized neither. "The mountains," he murmured. Ayanna nodded once. The bracelet lay beside the map. Its scratches were old, but the engraving remained visible beneath years of wear. A soaring hawk, surrounded by tiny pine branches. Elias reached toward it before stopping himself. His memory stirred again. Not clearly, only fragments. Snow, a campfire, someone laughing, a pair of gentle hands fastening silver around a child's wrist. Then, nothing. The memory vanished like breath in winter air. "What is this?" he asked. Ayanna looked at the bracelet far longer than she looked at him. It belonged to someone who kept a promise. And the paper? A promise that was broken. Before Elias could ask another question, a loud sound echoed through the valley. Not thunder. A rifle shot. Far away, but close enough that both of them recognized it instantly. The horses had stopped moving. The lanterns no longer drifted through the storm. They had reached the lower ridge. Ayanna quickly gathered the 3 objects, returning them to the satchel with careful hands. Only then did Elias notice something else. The document wasn't the only paper inside. There appeared to be an old photograph. Its edges were cracked from time. For the briefest instant, he caught the image of a young white boy standing beside an Apache family beneath a line of towering pine trees. Before he could look closer, Ayanna closed the satchel. "You weren't supposed to see that. I've seen that place before." She looked up sharply. "No, I don't remember when." Her face lost what little color remained. "That's impossible." Another rifle shot shattered the silence. Closer this time. Then came the unmistakable sound of horses climbing over frozen rock. The hunt had reached the mountain, and whoever rode through that blizzard already knew exactly which cabin they were looking for. The most dangerous men are rarely the ones who shout. They are the ones who knock as though they already own the house. The horses stopped outside. Snow continued falling, muffling every sound except the slow stamping of hooves. Elias lowered the curtain over the frost-covered window. "They're here." Ayanna closed her eyes for a single breath. Then she stood. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she refused to sit again. She slipped the leather satchel beneath the loose floorboards beside the fireplace and carefully pushed a worn buffalo rug over the spot. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, Don't tell them you saw this." Before Elias could answer, 3 heavy knocks struck the cabin door. Not hurried, not violent, deliberate. A pause followed. Then a calm voice drifted through the wood. "Evening." Another pause. "We're looking for a woman." Elias rested one hand on the rifle, but left it pointed toward the floor. He opened the door only a few inches. The storm immediately forced icy air into the cabin. 3 mounted men waited beneath layers of snow. Their horses breathed clouds into the night. The man in front removed his hat. He looked to be around 50, clean-shaven, with the steady eyes of someone accustomed to giving orders without raising his voice. A silver deputy's badge rested on his heavy coat. Or, at least, something that resembled one. "Name's Victor Kane," he said politely. "We're tracking a dangerous fugitive." Elias didn't answer. Kane smiled faintly. "Apache woman. Mid-20s. Injured. Still nothing." Kane glanced beyond Elias's shoulder, trying to see inside the cabin. "Mind if we warm ourselves for a minute?" "No." The answer came without anger. Only certainty. The smile never left Kane's face. Cold night to refuse hospitality. Colder for strangers who don't belong. For a long moment, neither man moved. Behind Kane, the other 2 riders remained perfectly still. One carried a repeating rifle across his saddle. The other rested a gloved hand near the grip of his revolver, but made no effort to draw it. Disciplined men, not drunken outlaws. That somehow made them harder to read. Kane finally spoke again. "The woman stole government property." Elias washed his eyes instead of his badge. "What property?" "A packet of official documents." "And why would an Apache woman want government papers?" Kane's answer came too quickly. "She wouldn't." The silence that followed said more than words ever could. Inside the cabin, Ayanna stood hidden beyond the doorway, scarcely breathing. She recognized the voice. Victor Kane. Older, more gray in his beard, but unmistakably the same man. Her fingers curled into fists. Not from fear, from memory. Outside, Kane slowly removed a folded paper from inside his coat. "We're authorized to recover her by any means necessary." He held it up just enough for Elias to see a faded seal. The ink had blurred from snow and moisture. Impossible to read. Impossible to verify. Elias made no attempt to take it. "I can't read what's in your hand." "You don't need to. I usually do." Kane studied him more carefully now. "You've lived alone a long time, Mr. Walker." Elias felt something tighten inside his chest. "I never told you my name." The smile disappeared, only for an instant. Long enough. Then Kane recovered. "We asked about you in town." A believable answer. Perhaps. Perhaps not. The wind howled between them, carrying loose snow across the porch. One of the horses suddenly lifted its head and snorted toward the cabin. Toward the fireplace. Toward the hidden floorboards. Kane noticed. His eyes slowly drifted downward. Not to Elias. To the faint trail of melting snow crossing the wooden floor just inside the doorway. A trail made by someone's boots. Small boots. Fresh boots. His gaze lifted again. Quietly. Patiently. "I believe," Kane said almost gently, "you already know exactly who we're looking for." Inside the cabin, Ayanna reached beneath her coat. Not for a weapon. For the silver bracelet. She closed her hand around it so tightly that its sharp edges pressed into her palm. A single drop of blood slipped between her fingers and disappeared into the old wooden floor. Outside, Victor Kane took one slow step toward the door. Then another. The storm had hidden his approach, but it could no longer hide his intentions. Some memories do not return all at once. They arrive like snowflakes in the dark, one at a time, until the whole world is covered. Victor Kane did not force his way inside. He didn't have to. He simply stood on the porch, letting the silence do his work. "I'll ask one last time," he said evenly. "Have you seen the woman?" Elias leaned against the doorframe. "No." Kane searched his face, looking for hesitation. Instead, he found only the weathered calm of a man who had survived too many winters to fear another one. At last, Kane placed his hat back on. "If you remember anything before morning." He reached into his coat and removed a silver deputy's star. Not to leave it, only to let Elias see it clearly. "Report to the sheriff in Red Creek." Then he nodded toward his riders. The 3 horses slowly turned and disappeared into the white darkness without another word. The storm swallowed them almost immediately. Elias waited until the sound of hooves faded completely before closing the door. The heavy wooden latch dropped into place. Only then did Ayana emerge from the shadows. "They're not leaving," she whispered. "I know. They'll wait until daylight." "I know." She looked toward the window. "So why did they ride away?" Elias answered without looking up. "Because patient hunters let fear do the chasing." The fire crackled softly between them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Outside, the wind had begun to ease, but the snowfall remained thick enough to erase every trail before dawn. Finally, Ayana walked toward the hidden floorboard and retrieved the leather satchel. She placed it gently upon the table. "You deserve the truth." Her voice carried no hesitation now, only exhaustion. She untied the worn leather strap and removed the old photograph first. This time she handed it directly to Elias. He studied it beneath the oil lamp. A family stood before a line of tall pine trees. An Apache man, a young woman, a little girl no older than 8. Beside them stood a small white boy wrapped in an oversized blanket. His hair was almost white from dried snow. Around his tiny wrist, a silver bracelet, the same bracelet now resting on the table. Elias felt the room grow strangely quiet. His heartbeat slowed. "I know this boy." "You should." Her answer barely rose above a whisper. "It was you." His fingers tightened around the faded photograph. Impossible. He had no memory of these people, only broken fragments that vanished whenever he reached for them. "My father told everyone I got lost during a blizzard." "You did." "He said a trapper found me." Ayana slowly shook her head. "No trapper." She picked up the bracelet. "My father found you frozen beneath a fallen pine." The words settled over the room like fresh snow. "He carried you 3 miles to our winter camp." Elias stared into the fire. Somewhere deep inside his mind, a forgotten image flickered. Warm hands lifting him. Someone singing in a language he never understood. The smell of cedar smoke. A woman's laughter. Then darkness. "He stayed with you for 2 days," Ayana continued. "When the storm passed, he returned you to your family." Elias looked up. "Why was I never told?" A faint, sorrowful smile crossed her face. "Because the truth didn't fit the stories your town preferred to tell." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Heavy. The kind that changes a man without anyone noticing. She unfolded the yellow document next. "This is why they're hunting me." Elias expected a military order. Or a land deed. Instead, he found a handwritten statement covered with signatures. At the bottom rested an official government seal. One line immediately caught his eye. "Witness to the unlawful killing of peaceful Apache families." The remaining words had faded with time. His breathing stopped. "This is only the first page," Ayana said. "And the men outside know exactly what the missing pages reveal." Before Elias could ask another question, a distant whistle drifted through the night. One short note, then another. Ayana's face lost every trace of color. She recognized the signal. They weren't leaving. Elias slowly reached for the Winchester. No. He looked toward the dark window where fresh shadows had begun moving beyond the drifting snow. They were surrounding the cabin. A blizzard can hide footprints, but it cannot hide the truth forever. The truth waits, patient as winter. The shadows outside multiplied. Elias counted them through a narrow gap in the curtain. One lantern, then another. A third appeared behind the stable. They were spreading out, not charging, not shouting, simply taking every path away from the cabin. "They're closing the circle," Elias said quietly. Ayana stood beside the table, the leather satchel pressed against her chest once again. "They've done this before. You know their way of hunting. I know their way of lying." The room fell silent. The fire snapped, sending a shower of sparks dancing inside the stone hearth. For the first time since she had arrived, Ayana loosened her grip on the satchel. She withdrew another folded sheet. Unlike the first document, this one was stained with age and smoke. The ink had faded, but one signature remained unmistakably clear. Victor Kane. Elias looked up. Kane signed this. He didn't just sign it. She swallowed slowly. He wrote it. Elias unfolded the paper with careful hands. It was not an arrest warrant. It was a sworn statement. 23 years earlier, the handwriting described an attack on an Apache winter camp. According to the report, the soldiers had acted in self-defense. The camp had supposedly opened fire first. Women, children, old men. Every death had been declared justified. Elias read the page twice. Then a third time. None of it felt true. What really happened? Ayana stared into the fire. My father never carried a rifle. The words came quietly. He believed if you offered kindness first, someday kindness would return. She looked toward the faded photograph lying beside the lamp. When he found a freezing white boy beneath the pine trees. Her eyes met Elias's. He never asked which side your family belonged to. Outside, another whistle echoed through the darkness. Closer, answered by another farther down the ridge. Signals. They're getting impatient, Elias murmured. They're making sure no one escapes. Ayanna nodded. My father believed saving one child could change the future. She smiled sadly. Maybe he was right. Elias lowered his eyes to the bracelet still resting on the table. His fingertips brushed its cold silver surface. This time the memory came stronger. Snow falling through tall pines. Strong arms lifting him from the frozen ground. A deep voice saying words he could not understand. Then warm broth against cracked lips. Someone fastening the bracelet around his wrist while laughing softly. The memory vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. He inhaled sharply. It wasn't a dream. No. It happened. Yes. Another sound interrupted them. Not horses. An axe. Wood splintered outside. Once. Then again. They weren't breaking into the cabin. They were cutting something else. Elias crossed to the window. The stable. One rider hacked at the wooden gate while another led his horse away. They're taking my horses. So we can't run. The realization settled over both of them. Escape had never been Kane's concern. He wanted time. Enough time for fear to weaken judgment. Enough time for the storm to finish what bullets might not. Elias turned back toward the fireplace. His eyes rested on the documents scattered across the table. If these papers expose what happened, they'll kill anyone who reads them. He nodded slowly. Then the papers can't stay here. Ayanna looked confused. The mountain pass is blocked. Not every trail. She frowned. There isn't another road. I didn't say road. He reached for a faded map hanging beside the fireplace. It showed little more than rivers and old trapping routes. One narrow line disappeared into the northern cliffs. My father found it when I was a boy. He traced the hidden trail with one finger. Most folks think it ends at a dead canyon. It doesn't. It leads somewhere no one remembers. Ayanna studied the map. Then her expression changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she looked from the map to the old buckskin map inside her satchel. The markings were different, but the mountains were the same. The same ridge, the same river bend, the same forgotten canyon. She whispered only 2 words. My father's map. Before Elias could respond, 3 deafening knocks shook the cabin door. Not polite this time. Not patient. Victor Kane's voice rose through the storm. Mr. Walker. A long pause followed. Then came the words that froze the room more completely than the winter outside. I know who saved your life 23 years ago. Silence swallowed the cabin. Then Kane spoke one final sentence. And I know exactly where she's hiding. There comes a moment when a man must decide whether to protect his own past or someone else's future. The cabin shook beneath another violent blow. Not from the wind. From the door. Victor Kane had stopped pretending. Elias, his voice echoed through the storm. Open this door before someone gets hurt. Elias did not move. Instead, he lifted the old lantern from the table and placed it near the center of the room. The warm light fell across the faded photograph, across the silver bracelet, across the weathered pages that had remained hidden for more than 2 decades. He looked at Ayanna. How many copies? She understood immediately. Only this one. If they burn it, then the truth dies with it. Outside, boots crunched through deep snow. Someone was walking toward the rear of the cabin. Another circled toward the stable. Victor Kane had divided his men, not to attack, to make escape impossible. Elias quietly crossed the room and opened a narrow wooden panel beside the fireplace. Behind it rested an old hunting coat, a coil of rope, a lantern, and a pair of worn snowshoes covered in dust. I haven't used these in years, he murmured. Ayanna stared at the hidden compartment. You planned for this? My father did. He slipped the snowshoes onto the floor. He always said every mountain keeps one path for honest men. A faint smile touched Ayanna's face. My father used to say something similar. For the first time that night, the silence between them no longer belonged to strangers. Another crash struck the front door. The hinges groaned. Victor Kane's patience was ending. Elias. No answer. Only the crackling fire. Kane's voice hardened. You've spent your whole life wondering who saved you. A pause. Ask her who killed your father." The words hit the cabin harder than the storm itself. Ayanna closed her eyes. Slowly, painfully, Elias turned toward her. She didn't deny it. She didn't answer. That silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like years. Finally she spoke. "My father didn't kill him. You knew him?" "I was there." Another memory burst through Elias's mind. Not complete. Only fragments. A ranch. Smoke. His father arguing with soldiers. An Apache man standing between rifles. Someone shouting for children to run. Then a gunshot. The memory shattered before he could grasp the ending. What happened? Ayanna lowered her head. "Your father tried to stop them." "The soldiers?" She nodded. "He saw what they had done to our camp." Outside, another voice shouted. "They're at the back window." Cain answered immediately. "Hold your fire." The command surprised Elias. If Cain truly wanted Ayanna dead, he had already surrounded the cabin. Instead, he wanted the papers. Only the papers. Elias suddenly understood. They're afraid of the documents. Ayanna looked up. They're afraid of witnesses. Another heavy impact rattled the front door. A crack appeared near the upper hinge. One more strike would break it. Elias gathered the pages, folded them carefully, and slid them back inside the leather satchel. Then he picked up the silver bracelet. He looked at it for a long moment before fastening it around his own wrist. It fit perfectly, as though it had never belonged anywhere else. Ayanna watched without speaking. "You kept your father's promise," Elias said quietly. "Now I'll keep mine." She blinked. "What promise?" He slung the satchel over his shoulder. "That the truth reaches morning." Another deafening crash. The top hinge tore loose. Cold wind burst through the widening gap. A rifle barrel appeared between the broken planks. Then another. Victor Cain spoke one final time. "There is nowhere left to run." Elias looked toward the hidden passage behind the fireplace, then back at the broken door. A slow smile crossed his weathered face. "No." He whispered the words, almost to himself. "There isn't." Before Cain's men forced the door open, Elias pulled a rusted iron lever hidden inside the stone chimney. The entire fireplace shuddered. Ancient gears groaned beneath the cabin. Stone scraped against stone. Behind the dancing flames, part of the chimney slowly swung inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into complete darkness. Ayanna stared in disbelief. "My father," Elias nodded, "never built this cabin alone. Justice seldom rides through the front gate. More often, it arrives by a forgotten trail that only the honest remember." The stone passage smelled of damp earth and cedar. Elias lowered the lantern and stepped into the darkness first. Ayanna followed close behind, pulling the hidden doorway shut just as the cabin door exploded inward above them. The echo rolled through the narrow tunnel. Men shouted. Boots thundered across the cabin floor. Victor Cain had entered, but he had entered too late. The tunnel sloped gently downward before turning beneath solid granite. Its walls had been reinforced with rough pine beams blackened by age. Whoever had carved it had known the mountain well. "My father found this place after the war," Elias whispered. "He never told anyone. He trusted almost no one." Ayanna looked ahead into the darkness. Perhaps he trusted the right people after all. Behind them, muffled voices drifted through cracks in the stone. "Search everything. Check beneath the floor. Don't let them reach the canyon." Cain knew about the passage. He simply did not know where it ended. The tunnel continued for nearly half a mile before opening into a narrow gorge hidden between towering cliffs. The blizzard had begun to weaken. Snow still fell, but the eastern sky carried the faintest shade of gray. Morning was coming. Elias studied the valley below. A frozen river wound between the pines. On the opposite ridge stood an abandoned trading post, its weathered roof barely visible beneath years of snow. Ayanna stopped walking. "My father brought me there once." "The trading post?" She nodded. "He said one day the truth would sleep there until someone worthy came looking." Without another word, they crossed the frozen river. Each step echoed beneath the thick ice. The old building leaned against the wind as though waiting for them. Inside, everything had been swallowed by dust. Broken shelves, collapsed barrels, a rusted stove. Nothing more. At first glance, Ayanna walked directly toward a cracked stone fireplace. She knelt, ran her fingers across one loose brick, then another. Finally, she removed a flat stone no larger than a saddlebag. Behind it rested a small iron box, untouched by time. Her hands trembled as she lifted it free. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside lay several neatly folded documents wrapped in oilcloth. More photographs, military reports, signed affidavits, and a leather-bound journal. Elias opened the first page. The handwriting matched the document from the cabin. Victor Kane. Only this journal told an entirely different story. Every village burned. Every order ignored. Every innocent life taken. Names, dates, locations. Nothing had been hidden. Everything had been recorded. He kept his own record, Elias murmured. He trusted paper more than memory. Ayanna gently lifted the final item from the box. A silver badge. Not a deputy's badge. A United States Marshal's badge. Its owner was engraved on the back. Samuel Walker. Elias stared at the name. My father. A folded note rested beneath the badge. Its ink had faded, but the words remained readable. If anyone finds this, take everything to Marshal Benjamin Holt in Red Creek. He knows the truth. Elias read the sentence twice. Benjamin Holt. The name struck him immediately. He was my father's closest friend. Ayanna looked toward the doorway. Then why has he never come? Before Elias could answer, hoofbeats echoed across the frozen valley. Not 3 horses. Many. He hurried to the broken window. Riders emerged from the trees below. Victor Kane had found the canyon. But another group approached from the eastern trail. Different horses. Different coats. Leading them rode an older man beneath a long gray duster. A silver marshal's star gleamed against his chest. Neither group had seen the other yet. The valley lay silent for one suspended heartbeat. Elias looked down at the badge in his hand. Then toward the approaching lawman. He whispered only one name. Benjamin. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke across the snow. And for the first time in 23 years, the truth and the men who had buried it arrived at the same place together. The loudest victory is not the one won with a gun. It is the one that leaves no reason to fire it. The two groups met in the center of the frozen valley. Victor Kane drew his horse to a halt. Across from him, the older lawman removed his gloves before speaking. Victor. His voice was calm, almost tired. It has been a long time. Victor's eyes narrowed. Marshal Holt. Neither man reached for his revolver. The snow between them remained untouched. Elias and Ayanna stepped out from the trading post carrying the iron box and the leather satchel. Every rider turned to look. Victor's expression changed for the first time. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. You have no idea what you're carrying, he called. Elias kept walking until he stood beside Benjamin Holt. Then he handed the old marshal his father's badge. Benjamin stared at the engraving. Samuel Walker. His weathered hands trembled ever so slightly. I buried him myself, he whispered. You should have buried the truth with him. No. Benjamin slowly lifted his eyes toward Victor Kane. I refused. The valley fell silent. Ayanna opened the iron box. One by one, she laid the journal, the affidavits, the photographs, and the original statements upon an old wooden crate dusted with snow. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Only paper, yellowed with age. Benjamin Holt picked up the journal first. He turned several pages. His expression hardened. Then he opened another document. Then another. Each page carried Victor Kane's own handwriting. His own signature. His own lies. Finally, Benjamin closed the journal. You wrote 2 histories. Victor remained perfectly still. One for Washington. Benjamin nodded. And one for yourself. The older marshal turned slowly toward the deputies who had ridden with him. Read the names. One deputy obeyed. He read aloud every victim recorded in the journal. Women, children, elders, families that had never appeared in any official report. The wind carried each name across the valley. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Victor finally spoke. They were difficult times. Benjamin answered quietly. No. They were difficult choices. Another silence followed. Longer than before. Victor glanced toward his own riders. Neither moved. One slowly lowered his rifle into its saddle scabbard. The second removed his hat. Neither man was willing to defend a lie written in their commander's own hand. Benjamin stepped closer. I've waited 23 years for these papers. Victor's shoulders sank. Not in surrender. In exhaustion. I thought they'd died with the camp. They almost did. Benjamin carefully folded the journal. Justice is late. He looked toward Ayanna. But sometimes late is not the same as never. Without resistance, Victor Kane unbuckled his revolver. He placed it on the snow. Then his badge. Benjamin picked neither one up. Instead, two deputies quietly approached and relieved Victor of both weapons before placing him under arrest. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The mountain accepted the moment in complete silence. Weeks later, when the roads opened and spring finally reached the valley, the old cabin stood exactly where the blizzard had left it. Its roof had been repaired. Fresh smoke rose from the chimney each morning. Outside the front porch, Elias dug a narrow hole beside the steps. Iona knelt beside him holding a young ponderosa pine wrapped in burlap. "My father believed these trees outlived hatred," she said softly. Elias smiled. "Mine believed a man should leave the land better than he found it." Together they lowered the small tree into the earth. Neither rushed. Neither spoke for a while. The silver bracelet still rested around Elias's wrist. Not as a debt, as a reminder. When the last handful of soil covered the roots, Iona stepped back and looked toward the mountains. The snow was almost gone. The same trail that had once carried a frightened child to safety now stretched peacefully beneath the spring sun. No one could erase what had happened there, but neither could anyone erase the truth any longer. Elias rested one hand against the young pine. Its branches moved gently in the morning breeze. Out here, the mountains remembered everything. Not who was Apache, not who was white, only who chose compassion when the storm arrived. And sometimes, that was enough to change the story that history had tried so hard to bury.